It's been downhill since Bush won, at least in terms of presidential dignity. Since Bush Sr. is all been downhill, and frankly, also in America's fate, I believe possibly last turning point was 1990s or early 1990s, and Pat Buchanan was America's last chance for some kind of peaceful, healthy resolution. But at least in terms of presidential dignity, since Bush won, it's all been downhill. You know, I never liked this man, Bush Sr., his policies, but he was a serious man, and the last president America had. I have no patience for people who complain about the supposed vulgarity of Trump, or say he's a clown, or the potty mouth, or this kind of thing. America has had clown presidents since the end of Bush 1, and only a very coarse sense of what's vulgar or not vulgar can make you think Trump is worse than Clinton, for example. Clinton was the first nostril president, okay? The backwoods clown for the plebs. It doesn't get more vulgar than the saxophone guy, the underwear brand on TV guy that Clinton was. He imagined himself an alpha ladies man, but you look at all of his past conquests, what do they amount? I mean, he bullied secretaries and such. And then he was entrapped by Epstein and whoever he was working for with Monica Lewinsky. I mean, I don't know that for sure, but why did Epstein have a portrait of Clinton in a blue dress up on his wall in Monica Lewinsky's dress? Was it just a nice joke, or was it a trophy? Well, think it through. If you're a rich blackmailer who uses sexual blackmail on behalf of who knows who, and you put that painting up, why would you do that? Is it a joke? So this performing blackface clown Clinton, then they had winner Bush 2, Bush Jr., W. And I don't need to remind you about Bush 2. He's already been made fun of too much. He's a simian of some kind, and I do like the clips of him. There's one where he goes 1, 2, 3, 4. Is very funny, and he talk of promoting love between women and their gynecologists. Is this type of guy? But it's possible that W. Bush too, that he was just a man of high leisure and highbrow troll. I'm not sure. He possibly, if he had mistress, possibly his mistresses were better looking than Clinton's, I'm sure. I mean, again, look at Clinton. But anyway, Bush 2, Bush W, he was not running anything. The derp state strategy is to put a clown in a pantsuit up like Hillary Clinton, and then to threaten your country with a horrid apocalyptic bombing campaign so you don't know what to do. Clinton as president is equivalent of Caligula making his horse a senator. You've heard this before. It totally throws people off. It's Thomas 7-7 idea. He pointed this out. It's a form of psychological warfare to pick clown presidents like this. So that's right, I said it. American president choices since Bush 1 have been psychological warfare by the derp state. Now, Trump is different. He's also psychological warfare, but from what I hear, apparently by another faction. One without a name yet. My friend Ildvold, he knows. I will alert you to his presence. But yes, you see, then you had what me worry Alfred E. Newman Obama, the dorkiest black bathhouse monger they could find as president. Obama, another vulgarian. Listen to his audiobook. Listen to him struggle to say motherfucker. He's this word. Listen to him struggle say this with a black accent. He's library dork. Obama is American black in the same way, you know, if I ran for office in America, I can start to claim I'm a Scotch-Irish descendant from settlers of Tennessee. That's the same way that Obama is an American black man. It's trans-ethnicism. So this man was pegged every night throughout the course of his administration by Michael. And meanwhile, guys like John Negroponte, they run the country. So I'm telling you, Spurgs, to consider taking foreign service exam. It's very difficult exam, and it no longer guarantees you a diplomatic post, but still, we need people in such positions. So where am I going with this? I'm saying you live in a clown regime, and Trump is the intended cure. We'll see how he does. Nothing is over until it's over in politics, but I understand why many of you despair and are upset, because you've been thrust into a carnival show of, as I thought, hellscape. As I thought, that's from Lovecraft for you non-weebs. And you need something. You feel it's not being done fast enough. You feel you're in hellscape. But I'm telling you to discipline yourselves. Do not be like me. I'm an internet lunatic. And you need to save your nation with your friends, and that means entering positions of influence, especially in the security apparatus. And that means having watertight OPSEC. And I will talk more about OPSEC and how to keep yourself safe and private over the coming days. But some of you can't be convinced. Someone got it into your head that collapse is coming, the end of the world is coming in 5 years. Okay, somebody told you this. It's all over, so you have to act. It's stupid. Now, I concede it can get bad. It will get bad. The left is lunatic, and I don't see how the 2020s won't be a terrible and a violent time. And I'm not endorsing anything, but it's hard to see how it will be a good time. But then, in that case, most of all, you will need to be in a position of responsibility, and especially one having to do with the police or the security state, in order at least to help yourself or your family and your friends. If you don't believe me, you read Conrad. Read Conrad, Joseph Conrad book, Nostromo, a book I often recommend. It's a story about the collapse of a ramshackle country and the rebirth of another. And you'll see the men they rely on there, Nostromo, our man. And the people involved, and why I tell you this, when you read the book, you'll see. And incidentally, is also the best book ever written about South America. You will understand, for example, events in Bolivia recently, and most of those countries, if you read it. This style of Conrad is a bit heavy, is a bit hard to get through at start, but I strongly recommend it. You know, Cretino America is unfortunately also the near future of the United States too, with all the problems that come with that. So regardless, speaking of which, do you hear? Uruguay leftist government, where I went just last week to overthrow the government for the election. And Uruguay government was just voted out of power after 15 years, the leftists. And the win of the right wing is confirmed just 2 days ago. He's not right wing in the way you want, the new president of Uruguay. He doesn't sound like a Trumpist, but it's complicated. It's much better than the leftist goons who were there for 15 years. Because in his own way, the new president of Uruguay, he will try to make life a little better for the civilized parts of that country, whereas the previous government just let homeless and robbers take over Montevideo, the capital. It's amazing, the worldwide infestation of the homeless. The collapse in security is also what brought Bolsonaro to power in Brazil. You know, it can help us. Anyway, enough of this. Actually, this show, I have quite different things to talk to you about. I want to discuss first some ideas I recently pitched to HBO, the TV station, cable, and to Spielberg, the director. I pitched some show ideas. And then to discuss World War II matters, and in particular, the problem of the war on the Eastern Front, and also the very sensitive, controversial subject of Holocaust, which is it's overdone on shows, on message boards, in popular culture and academia, in your school, everywhere. It's just overdone. But the things I will tell you, like usual, I think you're unlikely to have heard anywhere else. It's very unpleasant subject, very ugly, but I want to introduce you to maybe some highbrow debates on this so you don't get caught up in the midget wars around it. So now I must go to break. I found, by the way, just for a suggestion for snack, I found a kind of caramel milk that you put in coffee now. It's kind of condensed caramel milk I drink throughout the day in coffee. Show coffee is like caramel with glycine. It's very smooth mind. Smooth mind show. Yes, I am trying to enter Hollywood world. I lived in Hollywood for a while. I had nothing to do with the movie or entertainment industry, nothing at all. I would just drive around at night, Hollywood, Thai town and Armenia town, and downtown Los Angeles. It was very nice, empty streets, vaporware atmosphere. But it's true, if you go to, let's say, Santa Monica Cafe, you will meet many aspiring actresses and writers and such. It is very entertaining to see this kind of striving. It's entertaining to see the kind of ambition and delusions of the art people and the kind of theater people have. Some of you will make it, some of them will make it in that world, but not without sucking a lot of cock. And I have a friend who he blackmailed a Netflix executive recently in accepting his miniseries show idea. It will air next year on Netflix special. And I tell you the plot about my friend miniseries. It's about the DC, Washington DC political think tank and lobbying world. The working title is Our Principles, Our Decency. It's about the makings of a Washington power couple. I like this plot. It's about an assistant political philosophy instructor with a kind of conservatarian leanings, somewhat porthy, of pale skin and soft hands, who wears a bow tie. And he aims to teach curriculums of the classics plus the founders, the usual Plato to the Federalist and Lincoln, type of boilerplate. But he finds himself in rather unusual circumstances for what he expected. This is set a few years in the future when he is denounced by a student mob as a white supremacist and a white nationalist for having because he has an all-white curriculum. And he can't only teach dead white men, you see. I wonder why they haven't gone this far yet everywhere, but I think they will at some point soon. But so he's forced to teach, for example, Patrice Lumumba. Lumumba, he's the Afro-Marxist founder of the Congolese Republic and a major political thinker and political theorist of the 20th century, one of the luminaries, along with other geniuses like Julius Nyerere, the founding father of Tanzania. So this professor in the show, he then is able to, such people, they're able to fool themselves. So he's able to talk himself into even the justice of this, of having to teach these people. He works on a manuscript, The Founding Wisdom of Patrice Lumumba. And he engages in close reading of the socialist essays of Julius Nyerere. But then he looks in his classroom and he realizes most of his classes are now Chinese students. Most do not speak any English and outsource their essays to Craigslist. But even so, he continues on this noble task of keeping political prudence and wisdom alive by teaching political philosophy and Lumumba and Nyerere political philosophy Afro-Marxist to Chinese non-English speakers. And he's able to convince himself, even in this thankless task, that he's shaping souls. So the first episode, the pilot episode I've seen, deals with this and how after enduring endless humiliations, he's nevertheless fired anyway for being caught diddling himself in the men's locker room when the water polo team is there. I don't know, but with connections, His Eminence Gree's advisor, he's able to move to Washington, D.C. This is plot of show, where he becomes a copywriter for a Koch-funded lobby group. It makes $30,000 a year, and he's tasked with attacking consumer advocacy and green groups. People who complain about pollution and chemical contamination of food and such, and xenoestrogens. There are such lobby groups in Washington whose entire job it is to attack us, So I've seen this show. It's quite good. It shows all the adventures of this protagonist I'm describing, including his courtship, of a very strong woman, an affluent white liberal woman like you discussed now, who works at the CIA. They marry and they become a power couple. He moves up in the world. He becomes a congressional staffer and eventually a lobbyist himself. And through this power couple social life, sort of Wiener and his wife, what's her name? That flunky of Hillary Clinton. You get a full view of the so-called ruling class, you hear that, the ruling class, the true aristocracy of the beautiful and the good that has congregated in the Mandarin capital of Washington, D.C. The title, yes, Our Principles, Our Decency, to be aired on Netflix next year. I want to see this show. But enough of this. For real, though, I have my own ideas for series, for movies. And I've wanted to make this following one for a while. I think I mentioned to you before, I have movie for a miniseries idea. I was watching Band of Brothers and other Pacific series on HBO, wartime series Band of Brothers, Tom Hanks. And I thought, why not pitch my own miniseries ideas? I contacted Spielberg, and he's very open to this. I have ideas, same concept, this 10-part miniseries about World War II, but instead it's about a special operations SS unit on the Eastern Front. Oh yes, the plot will center around a mortal feud, a central tension between a German Balt from Estonia, whose family was murdered by the Bolsheviks, and who is seeking revenge. It's a central plot centers a private vendetta of this German Balt SS officer against an NKVD commissar who carried out the murders. The Soviet secret liquidation police, that's what called NKVD. So that's what the central plot is. He pursues this wisecracking NKVD operative who's going to be played by Jon Favreau. He's already agreed to it. I'm writing this liquidation squad commissar to be played with great panache, with wisecracking, fast wit like you see on West Wing. There will also be a subplot in this show about an Ahnenerbe attaché. For all you non-weebs, the Ahnenerbe was the ancestral research institute of the SS. They were totally nuts, okay? They were psychotic. They were the ones who did the expeditions to Tibet and to Bolivia and the Amazon. They are the ones interested in occult lore. And look up, for example, Otto Rahn, if you're interested. R-A-H-N, the last name. He's quite something. That Dan Brown is resurrecting this Gnostic crap. But Otto Rahn celebrated the Cathars and was seeking the Holy Grail. He has a book about this. So that's right, Dan Brown, the Vatican conspiracy theory writer, he's a gateway drug to hardcore National Socialism. Be careful. But anyway, the Ahnenerbe are the ones who did all the weird research for the SS, and I'm putting a major subplot in this miniseries. There'll be an Ahnenerbe attaché to the SS squad who is searching for wild men among the Circassians of the Kuban. The Kuban is an area of Caucasus in Russia. So, there are long-standing reports in that area, I'm not making this up now, about species of wild men totally covered with hair and many other such things. They're supposed to exist there. By the way, look up the Colchis, the ancient people known as the Colchis to the ancient Greeks. Herodotus talks about them, how they're swarthy. Blacks have always lived in Georgia, that country in the Caucasus. Very strange. But in any case, so what do you think about this show idea? I'm submitting it to HBO for consideration, and Spielberg already has he's put out feelers for it. I have a follow-up in mind, if they let me, a kind of after series, also 10 episodes, about another Cheka commissar. That's Cheka, the early secret police of the communist Bolsheviks in 1920s, Lenin's most brutal liquidation squads. The guys whose job it was to murder all the families of the Russian nobility they could get their hands on. But this guy who's this commissar in the Cheka, he has a glint in his eye. He sees an opportunity, and very soon, after the 1930s, he manages to leave Russia, having leveraged his position and knowledge to sneak out Fabergé eggs, to sneak them out of the country. He sells them at an enormous profit in Paris, and he thereafter arrives in Hollywood as a remade man with a new name and a fortune, and founds a movie studio in Hollywood. And the rest of the show would be about his escapades there and his newfound opportunities in the land of freedom. Do you like this idea? I'm pitching this one to Larry David, and I'm hoping he will be open-minded enough to fund it and promote it. It would be a sort of illustration of Yuri Slezkin's famous book, The Jewish Century. It's a good book, you should read it. Yuri Slezkin, the famous neo-Nazi. Look him up, Yuri Slezkin. Read his book. I'll be right back with some historical matters. This matter of World War II and such, it's all overdone. It's overdone in education and mass media, and consequently also on forums, right and left, and on social media. Just endless postings and commentary about this. So anyway, for sure it's interesting time, but let me just get to what you all want me to talk about, the Holocaust, right? Well, here's what I have to say. As an American, you have strong cause to complain about the Holocaust propaganda, but you have to do it right. And by doing it right, you know, when the left or the neocons say do it right, they mean you must lie. Whereas when I say do it right, for people on our side, I mean just tell the truth. And the truth is, it's too much. Right? That's the problem here. People forget. We didn't start it. In other words, it would be one thing if you had some loon like Ernst Nolte or guys like that who are actually mentally ill, by the way. But it would be one thing if you just went around denying the Holocaust out of the blue and for no reason, like they're pretending people are doing. But what people are faced with today is your kid, your child, propagandized at school with year-long courses from grade school to college, where in history class, this is all they learn. All they learn is Holocaust. And maybe some underground railroad too. So in the end, you have not just college students, but major journalists and even professors who know what the Underground Railroad is or everything about Holocaust mythology, but literally cannot place major countries on a map. And I'm not even exaggerating. This is a vicious kind of religious education because it's based on instilling moral guilt in some people and paranoia and a desire for revenge in others. Do you think the lurid and almost pornographic gore that is shown to people in schools and movies, what effect does that have? Are we allowed to ask that? Not only on those who are supposed to be guilted, but do you think it inspires someone like Paul Singer, a very rich and influential man, or Spielberg, to feelings of vicious revenge? Do you think it inspires this in them? Or at the very least, paranoia and such? But okay, what I'm trying to say is that the correct and true complaint people have is that there's too much of it. They've been propagandized too much about it. It's taken the character of a religious object, a sacred cow that no one can poke fun at, no one can question anything about it, and this is what rightly bothers people in a supposedly free society. It's very interesting, you know, all these trads attacking me and a few others as pagans and racists, and in particular the reason they attack us is because we're supposedly promoters of a specious spirituality who are threatening Christianity with our subversive paganism, supposedly. And it's very strange. First of all, because I don't attack Christians at all, but second, because these people, Vermeulen, Doucet, all the lesser fats who are into this stuff, the fatties, and the girl who's obsessed with me who writes about cultism and spirituality that supposedly threaten Christian belief in the American Republic, they never had a word to say about this cult of the Holocaust or of the mythology of slavery in the Americas, which have quite explicitly usurped Christian imagery and very much present themselves very directly as almost parodies of the Christian passion story, and which are meant obviously to replace it, and which are much more important in the sense, than I am. I have a small account, whereas they've taken over entirely the education system with this religious crap. But the trads have nothing to say about this. And which these founding religious myths of the secular state are used cynically to justify everything it does and to demonize opponents. When you have Holocaust survivors who are thrown out into the public sphere to be in commercials against Trump, and how this supposedly reminds them of the early days of Nazism, you know what this is all about. And in Europe, all of this has been, it's for a long time used to promote mass immigration and to smear opponents of mass immigration as genocidal maniacs. So I'm not telling you anything you don't know here, but my point is that you have every right, even from a liberal and entirely liberal democratic point of view, and from a moderate Christian point of view, to complain about these propagandistic mythologies and outrages against you and your children. Because that's what Holocaust so-called education is. And that's something quite separate from its historical truth or falsity. Norman Finkelstein who I don't much like in any way, he's nevertheless very right about the Holocaust industry in this way. And they've called him a denier for it. They're insane. He's a Jewish guy. I think his parents either escaped or were in the Holocaust, but they call him a denier. And in his case, it's a bit different because he was talking more about the way Israel uses it now to justify its actions. Or the way, for example, that Poland is currently being bullied to give reparations, even though millions of Poles died in the same event, whatever you want to call it. And there's now a law in Poland that is proposed that would send, when a pensioner dies, if they have no heirs, it would send their wealth to Israel. And I think this is just obviously gross infringement on the nation's sovereignty. But the Polish who object to this are called Nazis. So these are the kind of things Finkelstein is referring to. But I'm talking about something a little different, just the overload in Holocaust stuff that people are just tired of it. In other words, we didn't start this. Let me give you an analogy. Many West Europeans, they grow up with the Holocaust education and a very strong anti-fascist indoctrination. And many were not in the slightest anti-Semitic, believe it or not. But they weren't. I mean, the ones who grew up now. I know many of these kids, for example, from Belgium. They grew up philo-Semitic. They grew up loving Jews. And they happened to become nationalists, however, because of the terrible waves of human migration inflicted on their nation without the consent of the people, without anyone voting for it for decades now. So they're thrust in this world where they're slowly being made a minority in their own cities and turned into second-class citizens in their own nation. So they become nationalists, okay? So, as nationalists, actually they strongly support the Jews and strongly supported Israel. The Vlaams Belang, the Belgian Nationalist Party, was strongly pro-Israel, okay? But guess who became their strongest opponent? Well, I may do a show just on Belgium at some point in the future, but actually Israel, together, the Israeli ambassador to Belgium, the Israeli ambassador before to Poland, but in this case to Belgium, together with Jewish organizations in Belgium, became the nationalists' most vicious opponents. And a similar process happened in France, where French nationalist youth, again, who, as far as I can tell, grew up completely philo-Semitic, actually, but they were faced with CRIF, that's the major Jewish umbrella organizations group, viciously smearing and opposing them. Not because they were anti-Semitic, again, they loved Jews, but because they wanted nationalism. So it was quite shocking for a lot of these people to see this. And then as a result of that, they turned, so to speak, anti-Semitic, some of them. But others still make the distinction and are only against organized Jewry, so-called, against Jewish organizations who are against them, but not against Jews as such. But you see, what I mean to say is they are not the ones who started it in that case. They are reacting to something. And I'm not saying you need or should become a Holocaust denier, but the reason this is an issue isn't because of the perversion of the American nationalist who wishes to deny history or who's a genocidal freak, but because lurid, pornographic Holocaust propaganda is everywhere, pushed on children, and it's used to justify naked political ends. And people are tired of it. And the media establishment may not know this, but even people in quite high positions have been tired of it for some time. I can tell you, I've known a few, I'm not an important man in real life or anything, but I've known a few people in Defense Department, so-called, or Pentagon old guard, from old military families with high rank and full patriots. They're American patriots. They're also committed Atlanticists. They believe in NATO and all of this. And these people were absolutely livid when they found out they could confide in me. They spoke to me. They're absolutely livid at this stuff and the existence of the Holocaust Museum in Washington, D.C., which is a provocation and a spit in the face of the American nation. No people in the world has done more for the Jews than the Anglo-Americans. And this isn't my opinion, I'm telling you, but many people in parts of the establishment are absolutely livid that after all that was done for the Jews by America, including in World War II, something like the Holocaust Museum should be constructed in Washington, not to speak of the other guilt-tripping propaganda and so forth, but the Holocaust Museum is an insult. And now many copies, of course, exist everywhere. In every bumfuck city has a Holocaust Museum. Do you understand why? Do I have to spell it out for you why they are angry at this? Do you understand why having the Americans build a Holocaust museum in public at public expense is a ritual humiliation, or are you autistic? This has nothing to do with the truth, or not. It has nothing to do with, let me put it, historical facts or not facts. But it has to do with people tired of propaganda, of moralistic propaganda forced on them, tired of teaching moments, of the aggressive hectoring, of the pornography, of the cynical political uses of this. These are all valid complaints, even liberal complaints, even establishment complaints. But that assumes, of course, you're an American patriot. In any case, I will be right back. There is a writer I highly recommend for you. His name is Ernst Nolte. Like the actor Nolte, but first name Ernst. He is a German historian. He's often called a denier, but he's no such thing. You have to understand that the word denier means nothing.